I would request the guests standing in the back to please come in front so that we can start the session now. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Indian Chamber of Commerce in association with Asia Conference and Oxford University Press welcomes you all to the Kolkata book launch From Here to Denmark, The Importance of Institution for Good Governance, co-authored by Mr. Rajat Nag and Mr. Harinder S. Kohli. May I now welcome Dr. Rajiv Singh, Director General, Indian Chamber of Commerce, to come and deliver his welcome address.
Good evening. On behalf of Indian Chamber of Commerce, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you. And personally, I'm also happy that our long-standing friend, Mr. Nag, is here with us. And the occasion is that we'll do a small launch and also a formal discussions on the book itself and also the takeaways for the people who are concerned about governance and what it means, various dimensions, what will work, what will not work. So the book, which I'm sure while entering you have seen on the left side, and I'm sure some of you will also like to carry a copy back. The counter is there. The book itself has a very interesting title, From Here to Denmark. The importance of institutions for good governance, which has been authored by Mr. Rajat Nag and Mr. Harinder S. Kohli. Mr. Nag we have known from his ADB days. We had visited ICC team had even visited Manila, and they had engaged with the top leadership team. And later, we have worked closely on various themes, including, I think we visited Japan together, where we had a good meeting with the governor of Bank of Japan, Kuroda. So, and beyond that also we have worked on Act East, how India should look at its neighborhood, South Asia, many things. And of course, Mr. Nag is a multifaceted personality who specializes in diverse fields. And of course, he does it with a smile on his face always. So particularly we are happy to have him today with us. I would also like to thank Mr. Arghya Sengupta, the founder and research director of Vidhi Center of Legal Policy, and of course Mr. Jayanta Ghoshal, who is known to all of us, a very senior journalist. Calcutta, I'm sure everybody knows him, but let me formally welcome you, and we are happy to have you. Of course, we have Ms. Kasturi Kejriwal with us, representing the Aditya Group. This book eloquently reflects on the decades-old journey in the field of development practice and its linkage to good governance. Their profound experiences, encounters with various stakeholders, and especially if you are with ADB, you deal with so many people who want to partner, who are basically representing the governments, and that is where the governance really comes into play. The book will go deep into the governance challenges, framework, realities also of the present world. I think despite various achievements, which we should definitely feel good about, there are issues which have remained, and those issues are quite challenging and humongous in scale and their impact on the society, people, and of course on the planet. We talk of equality, justice for all those things. So of course this book looks at various aspects related to that. Reality is known to all of us, and I'm not saying this only in negative way, because things have improved a lot in many ways, many aspects. India is, of course, on a different growth path, and but everything passes through challenges, and challenges always remain. The improvement is always gradual. This book also, in a way, looks at what kind of models we can look at, but of course, any model which has worked in other part of the world may not work here. Any model which has worked in one state may not work in other state. Even at the institutional level, anything which has worked in one institution may not work in other institutions. So the book and the theme itself is quite exciting, interesting, and I'm sure there will be plenty of takeaways for all of us. And especially when a book is authored by Mr. Nag and his colleague, so the entire book becomes very, very important and meaningful for the readers. Of course, I would like to congratulate Mr. Nag, Mr. Kohli, for publishing this book, and I'm sure this will do a lot of service to the people who follow, who practice, and who are part of governance in any manner. For that matter, every Indian is a part of the whole governance, and we can also make a small contribution from our side. With these words, I would like to once again welcome you all, and I'm sure you will have very, very engaging session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I now welcome our esteemed panelists to come and do a formal launch of the book. Mr. Rajat Nag, co-author from here to Denmark, Mr. Jayanto Ghoshal, senior journalist, Mr. Orgho Sengupta, founder and research director, Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, Mrs. Kasturi Kejriwal, COO Aditya Group, and Dr. Rajiv Singh, DG ICC. Please come on this stage to launch the book. May I now request Mr. Jayanto Ghoshal, Senior Journalist, to conduct the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, and all gentle people of the society and the august guardians, today we are discussing on governance and development, but you know, the protagonist of this book, this book is the protagonist character. The book itself, the hero of this show. And our respected author, he is the bridge, he is the vector who is leading us to the book. We are reaching to the content of the book through the esteemed author. I am not that qualified person to discuss on this subject. I am a journalist, political journalist. But you know, the journalist popularly known as a jack of all trades and master of none. And so we have become anchors. My job today is to instigate Rajat Nag to clarify, to discuss, to tell us why he has written this book and what is the theme of the book. Only I have one qualification perhaps, that I have read this book before I come to this event. It's a fat book, near about 300 pages. But I have realized that although I am not economist, I am not a very technical person, but I have enjoyed the book as a common man, as a common reader, because it's not a very technical book. He may be a very technical man when he was in his own profession, and he understands, he knows all the micromanagement of the global economics. But he has written this book with a big canvas perspective. He is more philosopher in this book rather than public administrator or economist. I will not take much time because he will speak. My job is to provoke him to ask some questions. Why he has written this book and why the name? From here to Denmark. My first question was that what is called here, the single quote here? Here, is it India? No. He clarified in this book that here is, it means non-performance to performance. Less governance to better governance. So it's more, here is more symbolic. And in this book you will find Tagore, you will find Shakespeare, because Denmark, if it is Denmark, the Prince of Denmark immediately we can recall. So this book is amazing, and it's a book, as a journalist also, it raised a lot of questions. That, why Denmark? I visited Denmark as a journalist, and I went to take an interview of the foreign minister of Denmark. That time she was a lady. I was waiting in the foreign minister's office in the ground floor, and I was waiting, and suddenly I saw that lady came with this bicycle. And she entered into the room. And after 5 minutes, someone came and said, that minister is waiting for you, please come. I saw that that woman who came by bicycle for clean energy, for the pollution-free Copenhagen, the minister is using the bicycle, and it's a very small room. It's not a very colonial North Block, South Block, because my mindset is a completely colonized mindset. So it's interesting that it's Bengal Club, and we can remember Lord Macaulay. It was his house also. And Argho Sengupta, Dr. Argho Sengupta is here. He's another expert on this constitutional law. Whether it is constitutional anarchy or constitutional law, he will tell us. But my job now to ignite Rajat Nag ji, why the name of this book is From Here to Denmark. Is it only to instigate the readers to buy the books? You know, the nomenclature is very important. Although Shakespeare said that what is in name, but name is for publisher. This name is the most important. I think Argho also is a great writer, of very interesting, and his names of his books also very catchy. So now, up to you. Please, sir, you enlightened us. I have 2-3 questions. The first question is that why the name is From Here to Denmark. What was in your mind?
Thank you very much, Jayanto. And Dr. Singh, thanks again very much for hosting this. It's a great pleasure. For me, it's homecoming. As you said, you and I have worked together. And I really appreciate this opportunity. And Kasturi, thanks very much for supporting this. Before I say what this book is about and why this name, let me say what this book is not. This book is not a travelogue. And the reason I say this is because of, I suppose, From Here to Denmark, the first time it appeared on the net, it was categorized under travel section. And I think some poor fellow must have bought a book thinking it is sort of, From Here to Denmark. This is not a travelogue at all. This book really has its genesis in my work and my colleague's work. Harinder, a very dear friend, a colleague, my co-author. So when I speak about this book, I'm really speaking on his behalf as well. He unfortunately couldn't be here. When we traveled around the world and talked to the poor, who are the beneficiaries or intended beneficiaries of development, what struck me always was the poor hardly talk about poverty. Poverty is obviously an issue, income poverty, but much more frequently, much more fundamentally, they talked about more the injustices they face. They talk about the indignities they face, be it from the village landlord, be it from the moneylender, be it from the bureaucrat. Essentially, what they were all talking about was lack of governance. And as a matter of fact, that's what we heard almost. The closing sentence of all these conversations was, sir, there is no governance here. Yahan pe governance keh ke kuch hai nahi. That brought to mind Amartya Sen's whole concept of unfreedoms. He talks about freedom as development. He doesn't talk about, development is more income. That is obviously the case. And this is where also, come to think of it, when Martin Luther King gave his famous speech of I Have a Dream, he didn't talk about his dream was that all African Americans will become middle income. He talked about the dream that all African Americans would be free. So this book is in a way about reaching that state of freedom. Here is a place, as Rajiv, you rightly pointed out, where these basic freedoms, these basic dignities, these basic justices do not exist. Poverty is very degrading, but income poverty is just one. The poor get badgered with indignities, humiliations, exploitation in various ways throughout their lives. So here is basically a place where there is very poor governance. And it's a hypothetical construct. Here, as a matter of fact, just as an aside, my very first discussion with OUP when they asked me to write this book, and in a manner of sort of almost immediate response, I said, from Delhi to Denmark. And my friends loved it, particularly my sort of, neoliberal friends. I then got a call from OUP's seniors, particularly your lawyers, who said, we don't think that's a very good idea. Of course, we could say Delhi to Denmark, Dhaka to Denmark, Djibouti to Denmark, and we couldn't have a title which sounded like a geography book. So I said here, from here to Denmark. So here is that hypothetical place where there's deprivation, where there's injustice, where there is unfreedom. Denmark, on the other hand, in a way is also a hypothetical place, though of course it's also the name of a country. And that Denmark is, in our mind, probably what Tagore had in mind when he said, where the mind is without fear. So Denmark, Jointo, is also a metaphor for that North Star where we all want to be. Obviously, we don't want to be here. Here is not the place to be. Denmark is the place to be. So therefore, in consultation with my colleagues in OUP, we said from here to Denmark. And actually, just this evening, my very, very dear friend, my elder brother, Amitabh, asked me exactly this. What is this from here to Denmark? I said, just hold it, just hold it. We'll come to it. So Janto, and Amitabh, that's the answer.
I have a supplementary or complementary,
please,
whatever you say. I have a supplementary question. That means it is more subjective here and Denmark rather than more objective.
Right.
So here is not, that doesn't mean that in a total reference frame, this is zero axis, is not India.
No.
And Denmark, because I read that you have discussed the Japan model, exactly. you have mentioned and discussed Bangladesh, even you are expert and you worked in Laos, Vietnam, several countries, how their GDP is increasing, how they are doing, on the development front, and in a cultural way, behavioral way. But you have mentioned Denmark. So is it correct if I say that to you, Denmark is a Denmark model? You have prioritized Denmark in your whole theme. Is it correct?
No. Denmark is not a model. There is a Denmark model of development. You've been to Denmark. So this Denmark I'm referring to because in literature, Denmark is accepted now to be a model of human development. And if you look at the UN Human Development Index, Denmark is always near the top. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Canada. So this Denmark, let's not sort of try to necessarily mean the Scandinavian country. It is more a model, but Denmark, the country, also for the reasons that you mentioned, is there.
Got it.
Now, you also had a very interesting supplementary and an underlying question, which is why did we write this book? The name of the book, I hope I've sort of explained. Yeah. This book, very frankly, Jointo, for me and my colleague, was a process of catharsis. And I'll tell you what I mean. Good governance is now accepted as a necessary condition for good development. So you don't have to argue. Nobody would argue that corruption is good, bad governance is good, etc. So in the literature, the issue of good governance in literature or in policy-making circles or political circles, good governance is now accepted to be good. It is also accepted that to achieve good governance, you need good institutions, solid, robust, inclusive institutions. no argument there also. And of course, having worked in a MDB, we people who work in MDB, one thing we're generally good at is giving lectures. And we give lectures freely. We give advice freely because, it sort of just comes naturally. We never think of the poor fellow at the other end of the table to say, what do we do with all this great advice? In love, I forget the name of the country, in a country that I visited, a very, very dear, wise counterpart of mine. She was a minister in the Prime Minister's office. I gave her this usual lecture of good governance, of importance of institutions. And very, very gently, in a very almost inaudible voice, she said, Mr. Nag, I fully accept what you said, but how do I get there? What do I do? And basically I realized that she really had me over a barrel. Because I know how to give lectures, I just don't know how to do it. So I gave her some, mumble-jumble answer about, technical assistance, capacity building, all the right words. But I came out that meeting, Jayanto, feeling very inadequate, that I hadn't given her a good answer because I didn't know. And that was about 30 years back. So for 30 years, this question has really been gnawing at me. What to do, how to do it. I accept your prescription, but tell me what to do about it. And this book is therefore an attempt to answer that question. I'm not spending too much time, though obviously we do talk about governance and measurements of governance, definitions of governance, institutions. But if there is any value in this book, it is not on why good governance, but how good governance. Not why strong institutions, but how institutions. It is not the first word on this subject. It certainly is not the last word. It's work in progress. But I hope very much that policymakers around the world, and it's not country-specific, will find specific ideas about what to do.
What to do. I understood you are searching the solution and how to implement.
Right.
It's a praxis. Right. I have another question, related to your text, that you have mentioned different countries, different models, and you have said that only the rich countries can get development. It's an over simple, sweeping generalization. It's not correct. It is not correct that only the small countries could be the developed countries.
Right.
Big country can be an interesting model of development. But in the context of our country, because our toothache is more painful than the earthquake of China perhaps. Because this is a local issues. In our country, where irrespective of party line, statism, overdose of governmentalism is a phenomenon of our Indian cultural society. You have said a lot of things on behavioral aspect, even corruption. You have said that it's a more, behavioral aspect. You have mentioned the old Arthashastra too, several ancient texts. So it's a social, disease. But when statism is there, how it is possible to get your market-driven civil society? What will be the role of civil society? That is the main question. That is the main problem in our Indian context.
Right. I have to tell you that I have only known Jayanto by reputation, like everybody does. And I met him only for the first time yesterday, which was a great pleasure. But I also got very nervous when he came to see me yesterday and showed me this book. Jayanto, may I see this book? Just to show how much he has read it, look at the number of tabs he has got. So when I saw these tabs, I said,
it's not a technical book. That's
well, it only shows you read it very thoroughly, and your questions confirm that. So When I went back yesterday, I told my wife, Shikha, who's here with me, I said, padhai karna padega. He has studied so much, I better read up some myself. Now I can see why.
No, I was
so
just a
you
student.
have actually, Jayanto, asked me 3 questions embedded in this, if I may just parse it, because I think those are extremely important and in a way the nub of the book. So thank you. First, it is a misconception that you've got to get rich first and then achieve good governance. We have shown by evidence, quantitative evidence throughout the world and time. As you've said, we've taken examples over time, going to Denmark itself in the 15th century, and then modern countries like Japan and Korea. Good governance is a precondition for good development. You can't get rich first and then get honest. So you've got to have good development, which then leads to higher incomes. It's a very important point, because many times countries say, well, we can't afford to worry about governance because we are not rich enough. And we have argued and shown that poor countries can actually ill afford bad governance. Rich countries may still be able to somehow live with it, but poor countries must follow good governance principles before you can get.
You have given the example of Bangladesh.
I've given the example of Bangladesh, Botswana, Okay. So that's one. The other one, you've talked about the statism. If there is any comfort, India is not an exception. That's happening all over the world. And of course, this book is not about India's experience, but you can draw some lessons, which is the third part. And that is 3 institutions in our mind really makes up that whole sort of canvas of the important institutions for any society to thrive. And those 3 institutions are the state, the markets, and the community. And you are very right, sometimes the state becomes more powerful, and therefore it doesn't work. And we make the point that these 3 need to not only work well, but more importantly, they have to work in balance, and what we have called the 3 fellow travelers. So in this journey from here to Denmark, if one gets too far ahead, it won't work. So the 3 must walk in tandem. If too much of a state, you would have essentially the situation of the Leviathan becoming the feared despot. So if the state becomes too powerful, which is what you're implying, it can turn despotic. If it is too weak, it would be chaos, because then there is no law and order. Somalia is a good example. Somalia has all the structures of a state, excepting it is so powerless that people sort of, take guns and do what they will. So the state can neither be too powerful nor too weak. Markets, if they become too powerful, you have essentially what the behemoth of the markets, the large monopolies. So you have to tame this behemoth. Markets are very important for enhanced prosperity, productivity, but if the market is too strong, they can drive the processes of social deprivation. The community is the same way. If the communities become too powerful, you basically have crony capitalism. If it is too weak, they just become trampled over. So the point we're making in this book is the whole issue of balance of these 3 fellow travelers. And that leads me to what I hope we'll discuss later, is how do you strengthen the communities? How do you strengthen people about education, health, empowerment? So statism, yes, but I would not necessarily say it is because the state wants to do it. Politicians will always want to grab more power. It's a question of what are the balancing, counterbalancing forces, media, for example. And if that balance is disturbed, then of course you have the situation.
You have mentioned about this enlightened despotism in Denmark also, historically.
Yes.
But how they changed their democratic process. Right. Thank you very much, sir. If you have anything you want to add or something, otherwise I will move to...
I'm keen, very keen to hear Orgo, and I'm very keen to get you off my back. So I'm very
No,
happy.
now I think what I will do now, harmonium or tabla. They will talk. আমি খঞ্জনি. So
You are the singer.
You're the singer, exactly.
my role is minimal. You know, all you know, Argho is a great scholar, and he's an expert on constitutional law. And I want to ask one simple question on this book. What he thinks that this three type of fellow travelers, state, market, community, you can say civil society, community, NGOs, formal, informal, you can say that structure, where judiciary, executive, legislature are not in a very happy hours, conflicting interests, how this model of development, don't you think it's like a dry water? It's a very utopian idea that there will be what author is subscribing. It's a romantic idea. It's a very nice reading. But is it at all possible in our country especially? Globally also, I don't think, I'm not very optimist seeing this US situation and other. But on specific, with special reference to our country, if you can say that whether this book is nice reading and everybody should read this book, but it is dry water to implement this balance between these structures.
No, you are a journalist, so you are naturally cynical about most things and skeptical. I am more optimistic, and I think that the book not only shows promise in terms of where we want to go, but also a very practical roadmap in terms of how we get there. And we must remember that as a democracy, India is only 75 years old. And when, say, the United States was 75, they were fighting a civil war, and the country could have broken up. We are not there yet, and I hope we will not get there. And as a democracy, which is 7 decades old, I said we are young. We are taking our baby steps in the direction of trying to ensure all the benefits that democracy brings. So if we look at these three fellow travelers, the state, the markets, and the community, which has been coined, I mean, Nandan Nilekani has a term for it called Samaj, Bazar, and Sarkar, which I think is a nice way of putting it. And the balance that is spoken of. If we look at the basic structure of Indian democracy, like in many other post-colonial democracies, we started with a towering state, what we call the Mai Baap Sarkar, the idea that the state will be the guarantor of your liberty. So if you want progress, the state will provide the health, the education, work that will ensure that every Indian progresses. You want liberty, don't be afraid of the policeman. The policeman will actually guarantee your liberty, and so we have powers of preventive detention, sedition, treason, all kinds of provisions are given, which will allow powers to the police to protect law and order and protect your liberty. So this original idea, I see this between this push and pull between Samaj, Bazar and Sarkar was essentially a dispute in that, a philosophical dispute between Nehru, who was largely in favor of a large state, Patel, who was in favor of free markets, and Gandhi, who was in favor of bottom-up democracy. And what happens in that structure that has found place in the constitution is that the Nehruvian vision, together with Ambedkar's legal dexterity, wins out, that we have a state that, in the promise of a newly independent country, we have a state that is seen as the guarantor of our liberties. Broadly speaking, with the directive principles, health, education are all provided for, or in theory are provided for by the state, and that is the way we think that India will prosper. So in this balance that Rajat Nag has written about in his book, the state comes out on top as far as the initial construct is concerned. And so the key question, which I think this book rightly asks, and is a question that all of us must ask ourselves, is how do we empower community? Because the markets at this point of time, as a post-liberalization, have gone to a situation where they are fairly empowered. I would say that there's much more that can be done, because at the end of the day, what markets want is freedom, and I think that there is still some way to go, but markets are fairly empowered. But what we need to work on is communities. What Gandhiji was speaking about is that bottom-up village republics, bottom-up governance. And this idea of bottom-up governance is actually quite scary for us. Let's be perfectly honest. I'll give you an example. I now live in Defense Colony in New Delhi. And there is a road, which is a kind of prime locality in Delhi. There is a road in Defense Colony which has been shut for now 6.5 months. A lorry fell on that and some part of that road collapsed. But for 6.5 months, that road has remained exactly like that, and no one can use that road, and there is no sign of any repair. Now that is actually an abject failure of community mobilization, that residents of this area are not doing enough, myself included, are not doing enough to ensure that this road gets repaired. And this idea of local government is a scary idea. Because I'm on this Defense Colony WhatsApp group, and I'm just persisting with this example. And the WhatsApp group is essentially all about, and very, very honestly speaking, and there's factually, it's there on the record, is about how to close down the gates on Fridays so that people cannot go to the mosque to read namaz. That is primarily what is happening on that group. Which gate should close, which gate should not close, which domestic help should have Aadhaar card, which card. This is basically what is going on in that group. So do I want to give more power to that? I would say no. I would rather give it to some unnamed bureaucrat sitting in the Municipal Corporation of Delhi. But the answer cannot be take power away from local and give it to some unnamed bureaucrat. The answer has to be that we need empowered communities. We need empowered local governments. And so when you talk about this fellow traveler, this may sound a little bit idealistic and optimistic, particularly to your journalistic brain, but my direction is that I fully agree with what Rajat has written in that book, is that we need to empower our institutions, and B, we need to empower our communities to ensure that we head in this direction. Because one point that he makes in this book is very important, is that to get to Denmark, this mythical place Denmark, takes time. Denmark itself took about 500 years till it can be spoken, till now where we, 5,000 miles away sitting in Bengal Club speak about a model called Denmark. That has taken 500 years. So good governance takes time, institutions take time to build, but instead of looking at the state in terms of what, and especially this is election season, what can it do for me? I think we need to ask ourselves in terms of how do we empower ourselves as members of this community.
But Rajat, these three fellow travelers, I mean, how Orgo is saying that the village republic and the autonomy of the group or the village, but always I cannot think beyond a controlled autonomy. Even in the panchayat system, in the rural municipal authorities, everything is now, it's a controlled regime. So your fellow travelers, the market, state, there should be osmosis, I understand. It should not be watertight compartmentalization of these travelers. But the real autonomy, what Orgo is aspiring, is it possible at all?
Thanks, Robert.
Maybe I'm cynical, you are, as you described, but
no, you're realistic.
I'm just
as a queries of like
no, it's a fair question. It's a very fair question, and we've struggled with exactly this issue. Let me build on what Orgo said. I think that's exactly right. First of all, I think I've got to side with Orgo on an opening statement that we are in the optimism business, because the whole point is that the arc of this journey to Denmark, and this is history, this is not just my wishful thinking, does bend towards Denmark. If you look at history throughout, and statistically, quantitatively, the world is a freer place. There are more people who vote than not. There are less autocracies than not. Those are all, not perfect by any stretch of imagination. But anyways, having said that, I think it's important to recognize that this whole issue of this community empowerment is again not wishful thinking. There is a concept called inclusive localism. And this is now practiced in Scandinavia, practiced in places like the US, and even in India, where inclusive localism basically means you follow a subsidiarity principle where responsibility is given to the lowest level of government, which is nearest to the issue at hand. For example, the roads in the community. Now the struggle is people would rather trust somebody out there rather than their own fellow citizens. It is a matter of political adjustment. Ultimately, you've got to realize that this whole thing is about politics. Though, of course, we economists try to pretend that, economics only matters. What really matters is politics. And what matters is anthropology, philosophy, sociology. So you've got to work all that. Religion, we can't ignore those realities that you're talking about. So this gives me a good opportunity, Jayanta, if I may, to bring in the issue of human capital, which is that unless people are educated, unless people are healthy, many of these issues won't happen. Now, one can argue that, of course, educated societies also suffer from all of this, sure, but empowerment, the farmer or a peasant in the village does not dare to speak up. So how can you empower him or her? Let me take a sidetrack or digress for a moment just to mention Amartya Sen. Bengalis can never stay away from either talking about Tagore or Amartya Sen or both, just because I think they're very relevant. Amartya Sen once asked a fellow colleague of mine, he's from Bihar, and he said, how do you think things are happening in Bihar? And he said, oh, nothing is happening, kuch nahi badla, things like that. And Amartya Sen said, nonsense. Have you looked at how now your domestic help behaves or the peasant behaves? And he says, no. He said, now in Bihar, that same person who would not dare to look you in the eye, looks you up in the eye and says whatever he or she has to say. That is empowerment. Now, this is a slow process that takes time, but it happens. And this is again not wishful thinking, and this is not just India. This is all over the world. It shows that whether it's in Copenhagen, where this has been shown to work, or in Indianapolis, or in India, the arc of this journey, Jayanta, is towards Denmark. And you gave a good example of the American, situation. Yes, there have been now regressing movement, unfortunately, in many of the issues there. But, 50 years back, 60 years back, they had to bring in the Civil Rights Act, and that is no longer the issue. So, my feeling is that this balance will never be perfect. There'll always be back and forth. There'll be sliding. But the community is going to be that force to balance it out. How long it will take, time will tell. But it happens to sort of, work in that direction at least.
So, Jayanta, if I may just add one quick point, which is just from recent examples. So I would say, is the protest in relation to the farm laws. Now, I'm not taking political sides here as to where you are in terms of the farm laws themselves. But if you see how the protests played out, ultimately, and the fact that the government withdrew the bills, that is a sign of empowered community participation, which is neither pro-state, because one side was essentially saying that the state needs to continue and the other side was saying that the market now needs to come in, but was about reverting to a status quo. Now we may agree or disagree, that's a different issue. But one point that came out in that very clearly, which I also refer to in my recent book on the colonial constitution, is that there is currently in India what I call the New Delhi Darbar. And this has nothing to do with a particular political party. This has always been the case. That irrespective of where you stand on the farm laws, as to whether you think that the farm laws should be liberalized or not, The fact is that this is a subject that constitutionally belongs to the states. Agriculture belongs to the states for a reason. That the way in which sugarcane is going to be regulated in Uttar Pradesh is very different from the way in which paddy is going to be regulated in West Bengal, which is very different from the way in which areca nut cultivation is to be regulated in Karnataka. So there is a reason as to why this happens. And the farm laws, by which were passed by the center, again, irrespective of whether you support it or not, should not have been done constitutionally by the union government. It had to be done by the states. If a state felt that they now need to throw open everything to the market so that the farmer does not have to go to the mandi and sell it, that's fine. A state is entitled to do that. So I think that the farm laws is a small example, because this is a journey that takes a long time, but a small example of the assertion of community and an assertion of community in setting this balance right between state and...
True, I have just trying to understand. In people, they give a high tax, and but state takes the responsibility, what you are saying is health and
Right.
education.
Right.
Their priority that they will spend. And citizen, they're so happy that state is taking the responsibility. What you are saying, center and the state, because it's a huge country and 140 crore population, it's not the Denmark's population. But here, to implement this model and what you are saying, I appreciate, but the problem is that if we give tax, huge tax, and state will take the responsibility, there is a major issue is corruption. And politicization is not only the problem. Corruption is in different layers in the pyramid. So if you want to give more power to the state and the government, then this community, the space of the community, it's very difficult for the education sector also, in the health sector also. We cannot get rid of that. So I don't know, actually I am trying to think that we want to get this model, the popular successful development model in our country. But I am searching. This book actually ignited me to raise a lot of questions, but I don't know. I can ask you, but because what he is saying, that in our country, this will...
The word spurt doesn't mean you sort of, withdraw it. You just have more, and this issue of inclusive localism that I said, is you also increase the accountability. But if I may, Orgo, bring in an issue which, having somebody like you, a very eminent constitutional lawyer, gives me a great opportunity. When we talk about institutions, that I said about, inclusive institutions, institutions are of two kinds, formal and informal. Formal is the constitution, the laws, the rules, regulations. Now, in most countries now around the world, those formal institutions are in place in some form or another. The challenge is in their implementation. You might have all the laws, but how are they implemented? And that is where the second category of institutions come in, which are informal institutions, which is basically norms, the beliefs, the culture, the context. One thing that we have spent a lot of time in this book is talk about the informal institutions, because formal institutions only will give you the framework, but laws which work in the US will not work in India or Liberia. And I'll give you an example, very practical example, which I face almost every day. I live in Gurgaon, and we Haryanvis are known for many things, but we're not known, shall we say, for road discipline.
You certainly sound like a Haryanvi.
Also.
Gurugram.
So we have a three-way crossing, and every morning there is a traffic jam. And that is because everybody gets into that intersection and everything stops. So when I first came back from Manila, I said, I'm going to follow the rule. There's a octagonal stop sign. So I stopped, and I got honked from the back. And then, of course, people overtook me. And in very typical Haryanvi style, I was told in no uncertain terms what they thought of me. So I said, that is probably because there is no cop there. If only there was a cop. Then I realized there was a cop there. And everybody knows there is a fine, but nobody stops. The same Haryanvi, i.e. myself or others, go to Washington, and where Harinder lives, and I was surprised to see how well that three-way stop works. Exactly, everybody stops, go, stop, go. And the reason is, and it sounds very sort of simple, the reason is what in this book we spend a lot of time about the role of belief. I don't stop because I don't believe you will stop. And you don't stop because you don't believe I will stop. In the US or in Denmark, the belief system is such that I follow the law, not because I am a good person or not, but because I believe you will follow the law, and the laws work. In another place, it doesn't. So the lesson there is that informal institutions are as important as formal institutions. Culture is important, context is important, education is important, and these all take time. But before you say whether it will work, it does work. There's evidence from Africa, there's evidence from China, the whole issue of food binding in Africa, the issue of the female genital mutilation, etc., which are social scourge, or dowry for that matter, in our country. Laws came, they were not enough, the social behavior started to change, not fast enough, but change nonetheless. So I draw a lot of satisfaction from evidence, not only in India, but all across the world, and not only in this century, but starting from the 3rd century, 5th century, or in Denmark's case, 500 years back. And one hopes that it works.
Actually, Jayanta, I've learned this the hard way, because in India we are used to, when we flash our lights, or what we call dipper here,
right,
it means I want to go, I mean I'm going. Whereas when I went to the UK, if someone's flashing their lights, it means you go. Okay, it means exactly the opposite. So I actually learned this the hard way because I wanted to go somewhere and I flashed my light and the other person started coming. So I wondered what is happening. But that, actually there is something deeper there. And that is essentially about the fact that good or bad is a different thing, culture, belief is one matter. But the fact is that we need to devise institutions that work in our conditions, right, and in our situations. Now, for the last 10 years, I've been working with many governments helping in drafting legislation and regulation. And we find that often the first question that is asked is not, what is the problem we are trying to solve in India? The first question that is asked is, how is this problem tackled within the US? How is this problem tackled in the UK? And I'm not saying these are not relevant questions. These are relevant. But surely the first question is that what is the problem in India and right, what is the solution that will work here? We must learn from everywhere, but we cannot be blown away by what happens elsewhere. So I think the key thing is that we must learn from the journeys that have happened elsewhere and the evidence which points in that direction, but we must devise solutions that work in our context, no matter how uncivilized we may think we are.
I think
Perfect.
appropriate technology.
Absolutely.
That's right.
But now I think we are enjoying this conversation. I believe you are also enjoying the conversation, but time is, although it's a theory of relativity, but there is a constraint. We can take few questions from the audience. So the participating democracy. So I will be happy to take not much, but few questions. 2-3 questions, and my request, humble request, that you should be very specific on your question, because if it is a prolonged observation, then answer will be short. This is my journalistic experience. In Parliament also, if there is a very prolonged question, the answer is yes, no, does not arise. So I think you will be keen to know more from them. So the question should be very specific to us.
I'm asking Rajat, who's my batchmate in IIT. My question is that after 75 years of contribution by all prime ministers, including the present prime minister, why the Human Development, HDI, Human Development Index of India is lower than Bangladesh and many other countries, but I will name Bangladesh.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What made it so? Because on one hand we say we are developing, we have empowered women, we have as good as infrastructure as USA. But then why Human Development Index is still very low in a total of 193 countries? HDI is probably, India's HDI ranking is 110 or 112, lower than Bangladesh.
Right.
So if you can
Sure.
elaborate.
I think two reasons, Biplab. One is in Bangladesh, the NGO, the community, is really much more empowered and functioning. And they take a large part of that load of delivery. And I've worked in Bangladesh, and what I found very striking is that the NGOs and the government do not generally see themselves as adversaries rather than they see them as partners. Second, it's just a fact that we in India invest much less on health and education than we should. Our budget allocation is dismal, it's less than 2% in the public sector budget. A country like India, I have said very, very openly in public, and I say it again, should be at least 5%. And and unless we start investing, you are not going to get those results. Now, there are some very, very good achievements, and you and I have benefited from an institution which, we are very grateful that we had this institution, but our investments have never been adequate and needs to be raised significantly. There's a whole challenge of delivery. My point is it has to be much more than what we do. So I think, partly is that, and there are other challenges as well.
Yeah. Myself, Moina Ghoshal, another Ghoshal, and my sister, she's living in Denmark.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, you have heard about Human Development Index. Bhutan is having good Human Development Index. But apart from HDI, what other factors Denmark have that we should learn from Denmark?
Read the book.
Read the book. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, and more importantly, talk to your sister. I think she'll be a much better teacher than my book. So.
Very good.
This is a question from Mr. Sengupta. You mentioned that it took about 500 years for Denmark to reach where it is. But say, for instance, the ASEAN countries in our neighborhood, they have reached a similar state in less than, or maybe around 50 years. So why should we look at 500 years when things can happen much? Of course, your answer could be that it's a very complex country, India, and much more diversity and things like that. But then why should we have to wait 500 years to achieve that kind of?
But my only point in mentioning this, because he gives the history of Denmark in great detail, is the fact that to get from where we are today to where we want to be will not be overnight. It will not be a magical transformation that will happen very quickly. It is something that happens organically, and it will happen now. Whether that time period is 50 or 500, we can hope that it is towards the end of 50.
You are not giving any time frame, actually.
Yeah, I mean 500 is kind of in the way in which Denmark is.
Max.
Yeah, but I'll leave you to talk about time.
I think you're absolutely right about Denmark. But what I would say about ASEAN, and I'll take the specific example of Korea, though Korea is not ASEAN, but two things happened in Korea. And when I'm saying Korea, I'm sure you meant the South Korea rather than North. But in 1971, North Korea, the Democratic Republic of Korea, was ahead of the South Koreans in terms of per capita income. Two things happened. One is they had a huge land reform program. And that land reform program essentially made many landlords give up their huge land holdings to educational institutions because that would not come under the land ceilings. Once that happened, obviously educational institutions, going back to Biplab's question, got a boost. The other thing that happened was community involvement. The communities started to demand that the government, which has said they'll provide jobs, and it's a very competitive system, they demanded that the education system caters not only to the lower end, but upper end. And that then went into tertiary education, and South Korea, of course, as you know, invested heavily in research and development. And that's why the Samsung and the giants came out there. So again, going back, I'm connecting your very relevant question to Biplob's. We don't invest enough in research and development. And you just have to, so when I said education, I just don't mean primary, secondary, tertiary, it has to be higher end as well. So it's a combination of factors. And one thing I have to say this is luck. There's no getting away from the fact that Lady Luck plays a huge role. And sometimes, it works, sometimes it doesn't. But we can't depend on luck. So many of the things are, have to just keep plodding on.
Any other question you have? Yeah. Sasi?
Maybe if there are lessons on political funding, because in India it's already going on, but if there are any lessons, policies in other parts of the world which are which help, because after all the cost of election is so high and it's a cycle. It starts from there, fundraising, and then it follows backward. So
yeah. Dr. Singh, that's a very, very important question, very relevant question. I'll just cast it in a slightly broader perspective.
I can give you a headline of a story.
One thing that we say in this book is about transparency. And we have said that transparency is the best disinfectant. So if you fight about corruption, if you make it transparent, therefore India's Right to Information Act, imperfect as it was and is, was a major step. So on political funding, I would certainly not be against political funding because it's a reality, but make it transparent. Electoral bonds, make it transparent. Contributions, make it transparent. And then the process of funding itself is an indication of what people want. If somebody is supporting party X because of that party's policy, that is an indication. So let's be realistic. Their funds are needed because you've got the media and all of that. But the trouble is many of these things are done in the back rooms, particularly when the back rooms are dark. So just open it up. And, I think that's a lady there.
Yeah. You take the mic.
Yeah, actually, I was just going to refer to the Right to Information Act, which is basically a outcome of very long and silent work of people's movement and mostly people's institution. But currently, the scenario that you have in India is a very reduced space for people's institution kind of organization taking advocacy kind of a role has been stricken down very, so brutally by the government. Let it be, the central government or in many states also it is happening. So, and say people's movement like SAGs and all that has actually become just like an arm of government for delivery of services. So we have a very reduced space for civil society organizations to raise difficult questions now, asking the government about accountability or any questions that is, which is basically good for the public. So in this kind of a scenario, how can people's institution will be empowered if it's not directly in tandem with what is the kind of regime is wanting?
No, I fully empathize with that view because we all sort of see it happening. I would only say that time tells that the process is not linear. It doesn't improve dramatically, but it's not totally regressive either. So I think the civil society just has to keep at it, and we still, and I'm talking now specific about India, but it applies to other places also. You see a definite shift away from the civil society, be it in the US, be it in Hungary, be it in Turkey, be it in anywhere else. But I think the empowerment would have to just continue. This book does not get into any specific country or community because we're trying to draw broad lessons. And the broad lessons is that need for balance between the three actors. Sometimes one gets comfort, I realize that, but we just have to keep at it. Those of us in the civil society, we all are in civil society. We just have to keep at it within the constraints that it's in different points of time, at different pace.
The subtitle of this book is The Importance of Institutions for Good Governance. And I think this is one place where actually formal institutions have a role to play in empowering civil society, and there are particularly two that have to be pointed out. One is the judiciary and one is the election commission. And these are both institutions that on paper are empowered to be the citizens' voice, because they are not elected institutions, they do not have to follow the majority. And both of these, the election commission for the longest time has had a very unblemished record. The judiciary has had a kind of mixed record, and sometimes it blows hot and cold. But I always have reason for hope. There is a recent judgment which I wrote about in the last week, where the Supreme Court has unequivocally quashed a case against a Muslim professor in Kolhapur who wished Pakistanis happy Independence Day on 14th of August and also called August 5th a black day. The Supreme Court said that these may be views that you disagree with, and I also disagree with this 5th August point, but it's not something that will allow a police case to be filed against you, irrespective of what your view on that particular issue might be. So there are glimmers of hope. And secondly, the election commission, at the end of the day, whether the appointment method is one that includes the Chief Justice of India or not, in my view, is beside the point. The issue is that if the person holding that office is a man of integrity or a woman of integrity, they can do the function that is required of them. T.N. Session was also appointed by the government. I mean, no one else appointed him. There was no Chief Justice of India appointed him. But the T.N. Session also did the most independent job that anyone could ever have imagined. So ultimately, it depends on the holders of those offices, and the institutional structures must be there to ensure that citizens are empowered. And I think these two institutions are institutions that are critical to the continuation or to the realization of good governance in India.
Or I'll just add one simple point to that. I agree with entirely everything you have said. The third institution, I would say, is the media. That plays a very, very important role. And of course, we see that also waxing and waning, but that plays a very important role.
Thank you very much.
I think yourself.
No, I think we are also part of informal, dialectical relationship among these fellow travelers. We are in the same boat. One thing is very important, that sometimes as a student of politics, this organized, the structure, the formal structure, as you said, the basic theme. But the informal organizations also run by people, our mind is also not decolonized yet. So if we are not decolonized, and we are electing the government, we are indirect democracy or direct democracy, whatever be that as it may, so we have responsibility, and media is also not alienated. And we are not outsider. So I think we can conclude today's, it's not conclusion. We are in a state of flux. And it's a journey. And I think it's a half glass of water theory. I should be optimist. End of the day, in school days when we used to write essay, the conclusion always that there is a hope. And still, I should not be cynical. And I think as in Delhi, after all the meetings, we get the press release. I think Mr. Rajiv Singh also knows this style in his organization also, that the meeting is fruitful, but it is inconclusive. And further discussions will continue. So I think today also, I can, as an anchor, just mere anchor, I can conclude that just read the book. It's like a fiction. You can enjoy this book. And I have only personal suggestion that there should not be any speed reading. Although it's a fat book, but no speed reading will, you cannot enjoy through speed reading. And it is better, for me actually, my take, that if you read the chapters chronologically, then you will enjoy more, because there is a thematic thread among the chapters. You can understand just reading the introduction. See, that my own stake. And I think, again, we will get your presence in Calcutta for further discussion.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
hand over.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot to our panelists for such an engaging discussion. Now may I request Mrs. Kasturi Kejriwal, CEO Aditya Group, to come and deliver her vote of thanks.
Yeah, exactly. Well, ladies and gentlemen, very good evening to all of you. So I was just kind of, recollecting what discussion we were just having, and there are a couple of words that I could just type in on my phone. First being 500 years, second being empower, third being accountability. Fourth, it's a sentence, not too powerful, not too weak. And the last one was role of belief. I think these are few discussions, in a crux that I'm carrying with me today back home. And I'm definitely going to read the book and try to relate to, what we were talking about. It gives me immense pleasure that I have been given this opportunity to give the vote of thanks. And now I'm going to read the script. Well, it is with immense gratitude and sense of fulfillment that we gather here today at the book launch session of From Here to Denmark, The Importance of Institution for Good Governance, authored by none other than Mr. Rajat Nag, there he is, and Mr. Harinder S. Kohli. Please convey our regards to sir as well. We are deeply honored to have Mr. Rajat Nag with us, whose profound insights and expertise have significantly enhanced the dialogues of governance. And trust me, I don't understand much of it, but I could relate to what he was trying to say, and for that matter, all the panelists were trying to say. Additionally, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Dr. Orgo Sengupta, founder and research director of Vidhi Center of Legal Policy, Delhi, Mr. Joyanto Ghoshal sir, senior journalist. I must say that, it was really, really nice to hear you talking the way you were. And of course, Dr. Rajiv Singh, Director General of ICC, for gracing this occasion with their presence. Next page. I'm not going to give a long vote, however. Reflecting on the enriching discussion and interaction among our esteemed guests and invitees, we are reminded of the comprehensive scope of various issues addressed. I think, yes, there were a lot of questions also which came up, and I think the way we were answering it, it leads to another day of such a, gathering. I'm sure it will be arranged very soon. From analyzing the current state of the world and its challenges to exploring the multifaceted concept of governance and underscoring the pivotal role of the institution. I think one major takeaway also with what I could gather was that an education institute equally plays a very important role. And myself, since I am representing Aditya Group, who has a chain of school, so I really, really firmly believe that it's very important for each one of us, not only the elderlies, I see all senior people sitting here, but I would rather love, my grade 11, grade 12 kids sitting here and understanding what's happening. I think that is where I think the change will come in. Offering a compelling examination of historical case studies, the book draws lesson from experiences of countries that have undergone significant transition. By studying the journey of nations such as Denmark, Japan, Korea, and Uruguay, the book underscores the importance of balance and synergy among the state, market, and community. Our three heroes, that's what we were referring to, fostering social well-being. I think ये three hero wala concept बहुत important है. Until unless you have these heroes walking hand in hand, I think nothing goes where it should be. And it's very important that, maybe, we talk about eta hoye jabe, wo bhi ho jayega, this can be done. But I don't know, after leaving this hall, how many of us we will be actually thinking how to implement it, right? I think we should definitely, look forward and understand whatever we were discussing here for the last 1 hour or more than that maybe. How are we planning to implement it? What are the steps? Are we still going to be stuck in that 3 juncture of Gurugram? Or we still wish to see ourselves in DC, right? So it's very important for all of us to take that and implement and try to course it. Well, in closing, we extend our sincere gratitude to Mr. Rajat Nag for his invaluable contribution to this insightful work. We also express our appreciation to the Bengal Club for hosting the memorable event and providing us with a platform to engage its meaningful discussion, and of course the tea and the rest of the snacks that we had, it was yum. To all our esteemed guests and attendees, thank you for your unwavering support and participation. And I really loved it. I mean, everybody was so engrossed while the panels were in discussion. And thank you once again to each one of you, and we look forward to further dialogue and collaboration in pursuit of good governance and development. Thank you once again, everybody. Namaskar.
Thank you, Mrs. Kasturi Kejriwal. Now may I request Dr. Singh to come and deliver a small token to our panelists. Thank you so much everyone for joining us. With this, we have come to the closing of the session. Thank you.